and welcome to Our American Government. I am your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time, we looked at how the Americans declared their independence, but then failed to create a working government. Today, they will be creating that working government as we examine the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The convention began in 1787 with the expressed purpose of amending the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were recognized as not working, and therefore they needed to be changed. At this Constitutional Convention, the vast majority of the representatives who arrived recognized that they did need a stronger national government. And this will eventually lead toward abandoning those Articles of Confederation. But before they went in that direction, they first wanted to select a leader for that convention, a man that they all knew that they could trust and a man that they all respected. And due to his leadership during the Revolutionary War, the man that they zeroed in on was George Washington. So George Washington became the president of the Constitutional Convention. Now, despite George Washington being the president of the convention, the most important individual at this convention wound up being a Virginia lawyer by the name of James Madison. James Madison arrives at the Constitutional Convention with an entirely new plan of government already written out. And very early in the convention, he manages to get the debate of all of the delegates there centered around his ideas for a new government. He called this, or this has been called, the Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan took the lessons that the states had learned by creating their own state governments and applied them to a national government. Virginia Plan called for 3 branches of government: your executive, your legislative, and your judicial. But he took things a little bit further with the legislative branch and divided it into 2 chambers, 2 separate houses, which could debate and argue with each other. Madison's plan being that if there was a bad idea presented in one house that somehow gets support, that the other house of the legislature would provide a check and a balance against that power and that idea. His ideas were very democratic in nature. He believed that representation in both of these chambers should be based upon a state's population. Being a large state individual, as he was from Virginia, this would benefit Virginia more so than any other state. Now, there are problems with this. Small states hated this idea because under the Articles of Confederation, teeny little Delaware was an equal of Virginia's. And under Madison's Virginia Plan, Virginia would have more than 10 times the representation of Delaware. They liked a plan that had all states as equals. Even if that plan was flawed, it was better for Delaware. And the delegates of Delaware did not feel comfortable voting for any plan that reduced their power to such a degree. Of course, this is going to be something that Virginia is not going to be happy with, because Virginia, with that larger population, that sense of democracy, wants that appropriate level of representation in the national government. This leads to an opposing plan, the New Jersey plan. New Jersey the delegation was led by James Patterson, and he proposed that they throw out the Virginia Plan's legislature and just have a single house. Make it more like the Confederated Congress was. He accepted the need for an executive and the need for a judiciary, but he wanted that legislative branch to remain this equal body where each state would have just one vote. Larger states, rightfully, saw this as being an undemocratic approach to representation, and they refused to agree to it. So they had to come up with some sort of compromise. The compromise that they came up with, called the Great Compromise, sometimes referred to as the Connecticut Compromise, did settle this issue. In the Great Compromise, the legislature would have 2 houses. You would have the House of Representatives, and you would have a Senate. The House of Representatives would have representation based upon a state's population. Virginia would have more people in the House of Representatives. Delaware would have just a few. But in the Senate, all representation would be the same. Virginia and Delaware would have the same number of people. The way this works and the why of why this was agreed to is that Virginia has more people. If you're going to have a democratic system where the people rule, you have to give acknowledgement to the fact that if you have more people, you should have more of a say. So the House of Representatives was viewed as a place where the direction of legislation might be set. But any legislation passed in the House also had to pass the Senate. Both chambers had to agree. And in the Senate, those small states could unite together to shut down anything the large states were doing and refuse to pass it. So large states would choose the direction of government. Small states could stop them if they felt that the large states were acting in an unfair way. This is a Venn diagram which shows those two ideas and the compromise that came about because of them. If you wanted to pause here and take a closer look at it, I would recommend skimming through this if you want to have a good sense of these plans and where they ended up. Another compromise, the not so great compromise of the Constitution, is the 3/5 compromise. This came about because of an argument over representation. Once they determined that the House of Representatives would be based upon a state's population, they had to determine who would count. Southern states, who did not consider their slaves as individuals, considered them as property, did want them to count for representation in the House. If all slaves counted as representation, then the Southern states had more people and therefore more representation in the legislature. The North didn't like this. The North said, no, you say that slaves are property. You say that slaves are not free individuals, and therefore they shouldn't count at all. And if no slaves counted as population, then the northern states had greater population, and therefore they would have an advantage in the legislature. The compromise that they came up with, in a numbers game, seems to make sense at the time, but it is a totally inhumane way of looking at human beings. The North and the South compromised that a slave would count as 3/5 of a person for representation in the House. This, of course, was an insulting way to look at a human being, as only having 3/5 the value of a free white individual. Moving on to areas of less contention, the executive and judicial branches were less debated and more readily accepted by all parties. The Articles of Confederation had not had an executive or judicial branch, and everybody realized this was a problem. So the new government would have a president and have a Supreme Court that would lead those branches of government. Voting in elections, their solution to this problem is an interesting one that continues to affect our presidential election system today. At the time, it's important to note that all white landowning males could vote for representation in the House of Representatives. We have broadened that dramatically since those times, which is a step in a good direction. Initially, however, also, senators were selected by state legislatures. We, as the people, did not get to vote on who would be in the Senate. We voted for the House of Representatives. We voted for our own state legislatures, but the state legislatures chose the senators. We overturned that in the early 1900s. Now, the president is going to be selected by an electoral college. This electoral college is a group of individuals who choose the person that they think will be the best president with the advice of the citizens. That phrase right there, the advice of the citizens, has been a tricky one, as frequently throughout U.S. history, not incredibly frequently, but periodically, The citizens, through their votes, will say, we want candidate X, and the Electoral College, or a few members of it, have voted for candidate Y. It's never impacted the actual outcome of an election, but it has happened periodically. All right, so we have our Constitution. September 17th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention approved this Constitution. Now the states needed to agree to it. It wasn't a perfect document. Nobody thought it was perfect. But Ben Franklin probably said it best when he said, I must consent to this Constitution because I can expect no better. He did not believe that the states of the time could form a better government than the one they had. And that would be a view of many moving forward. Next time, we will look at how Federalists and Anti-Federalists, the supporters and opponents of the Constitution, will argue about whether or not it is the best step for America. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and farewell.